Hello, everyone. I'm Erik D'Souza, and you are joining us today for Crime Writers of Canada as we continue to talk to the guest of honors from Bouchercon 2026 in Calgary. It is my pleasure today to talk to Mark Graney. Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing good, Eric. How are you?
I'm very good too. Mark is our American guest of honor, and I I know you go to a lot of Bouchercons, but I'm excited about this one.
Me too. Me too. Very much.
So if anybody doesn't know you, I'll read your bio. Mark is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of 25 novels, including The Gray Man in 2009, and 12 more books in the Gray Man series. He also co-authored 3 Jack Ryan novels with Tom Clancy and authored 4 more Jack Ryan novels after Mr. Clancy's death. Mark is the co-author of the military thriller Red Metal and the author of the Josh Duffy series, including Armored and Sentinel. The film adaptation of The Gray Man was released in 2022, starring Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, Anna de Armas, and was the fifth most watched Netflix film of all time. Mark lives in Memphis with his wife Allison, his 3 stepchildren, and 4 rescue dogs. I'm going to start there. You have a very big household. I have less children than you and only 1 rescue dog. How do you find the time with such a large family to write such large books at such a fast pace?
Yeah, it's tougher now than it ever was, and I think I'll be saying that every year. I don't know. I guess when the kids go off to school, but really there's just so many other things pulling at your attention, and I have, one book due a year at this stage in my career, and I'm always working on something else. So this year I will write most of 2 books, and probably finish it in the second book early in the spring, and immediately go into next year's book. So let's say I'm writing a book and a half a year, and my books are long. The one I'm working on now, and most of the Gray Man books are over 150,000 words. And there's a lot of things pulling you, but the one thing pulling you back is your deadline. And it's always funny. The first few months I'm working on a book, I haven't figured out what it is about the book that really excites me or is drawing me back. I kind of have a very, very thin basic idea of what the book's about, and I just have to write until I really find that thing that pulls me in. So the last couple months, on say each book takes 6 to 8 months, the last 2 or 3 months, it's very easy for me to go to work. I mean, I'm always stressed about the deadline, which is looming or has passed occasionally, but there's something pulling me to get back to my laptop because I'm excited where the book's going. Those first few months, it feels like you're just sort of treading water against the tide, and those are the tough days. It's so much easier to go do something else or to allow some other distraction to pull you in. But once you have that idea of what it is about the book that really is exciting you, then that's the easy time. The words flow.
Um, your books are from I've read some of your Tom Clancy's and I'm reading The Gray Man. They are sort of a mix between current affairs reality and world building that you're doing. Do you read the newspaper and go like, "Oh, I have to write about this," or is it more just like I just have to stay close to the world and I'm just going to build mine?
No, I very much am interested in current affairs and have been my whole life, and international affairs and politics and things like that. So I would it's easy for me to write about these things. When I write a book that involves the war in Ukraine, you know, I always research my books and do a lot of research for the books, but I'm listening to 90 minutes of podcasts about that 5 days a week anyway, and every news article, and I'm reading pieces, and reading books and listening to audiobooks about it. So it's almost like I'm doing the research whether I'm writing a book about that subject or not. The book I'm writing this year involves China and some emerging threats with China, and I'm reading listening to audiobooks and reading books and uh, articles about it just because that's what interests me. So I have a lot of esteem for writers who write fantasy or science fiction because that's just so different from what I do. Because I feel like so many ideas are just generated by what's going on in the world, and I've always been like that. As even before I was a writer, I very much kept up with the news and was very interested in it. So I think a lot of my creativity just comes by seeing what's really there and just riffing on that to a degree.
A lot of authors, when we're talking about locations, say that they have to go to that place in order to properly research it. You're international all over the place. So far in Hardline, you're in Bulgaria, Nicaragua, Northern Ireland, and all over the coast of the US. Is podcasting and the internet enough for you to research a place, or do you have to go there if you want to write about it?
You definitely do not have to go there. I've written books that take place in North Korea, and I most definitely have never been to North Korea or South Sudan or places like that. So there's places where I just can't go. And then, during the COVID years, I planned some of my most interesting, locations thinking I was going to go and then couldn't because of COVID. And that was unfortunately. So you can definitely do it without going. But every time I do location research, I'm always surprised by so many things. And I always go, I'm really glad that I came here because I either wouldn't have gotten that idea or I would have written something that would have been like, really wrong. And it's fine to have things that are wrong in your fiction. I'm not as slavish to that sort of thing as I was earlier in my career. You just need to be credible. It doesn't actually have to be accurate. And I've had people write me and say, how dare you write about an outdoor fire escape in Cologne, Germany? They passed a law in the 1950s that fire escapes have to be indoors. And they're like, I threw your book in the trash when I read that. And I'm like, I used to live in Cologne, Germany. I never noticed that. Um, so, you're going to get people, no matter how hard you work, that you're still going to get things wrong. So you can't just chase that. You have to write the most exciting story as possible. But, I went to Northern Ireland to research the hardline, and I really think it informs the way I wrote the characters, the way I wrote the kind of the vibe and specific to the location. So this year I went to the Austrian Alps in the dead of winter to research my next book, and I had never been there, and it's hopefully it'll help the book. So I think it really does help if you get the chance to go.
I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem like a very nice guy.
Well, I hope so.
But you write about really tough, stone cold assassins.
Yeah.
How do you get into their heads?
That's a good question. And I think it's honestly from being a reader. I mean, I grew up reading nonfiction, but when I was like in my very late teens, I picked up Tom Clancy and read a Clancy novel and then just became completely addicted to espionage novels and military novels and political novels. So I think a lot of the the more the bad characters or whatever, they're either something I've gotten from nonfiction or from fiction in that sort of vein. So I mean, gosh, I've studied, just take your pick, the death squads in Central America and cartels and gangs in Asia and Middle East terrorism, all these different things, and you certainly learn the psychology of villains, and that's always been very interesting. I like to infuse my books with kind of the mindset of all the characters, whether they're a good guy or a bad guy. When you're in the point of view of that person, I want their actions to make sense to the reader. So I don't just put a black hat on the bad guy or like a handlebar mustache and say that's the villain. I want to make it very sort of, it makes sense that for that guy's, warped brain that he's doing what he thinks is right. So we're all heroes in our own story, as they say. So I guess when I'm writing in that character, I'm really trying to channel what it is that makes them a bad guy and work that into the story.
Well, that I promised you sort of a philosophical question, and we're sticking with bad guys. Whetstone, the Northern Ireland assassin, um, I don't know, like he's a great bad guy, but at the same time, I mean, he's an assassin, and you can
Yeah,
see his motivation. And we're also dealing with the gray man, and we're in the gray man's head, who's also an assassin, who
right.
on occasion, like there's a scene early on where like he's deciding if he's going to kill two people or not, and he's
Mhm.
thinking he kind of has to,
Yeah.
but he's there's the decision that they all both have to make, and
Hmm.
they both often choose to kill that person.
Yeah.
How is one guy a good guy and one guy a bad guy in your head?
It's a great question, and that's something that I want people to kind of wrestle with in this book. I mean, the books they're written to be entertainment, but just me as my own sort of um, experiment as I'm writing these books. I'm always looking for something that's fascinating to me about it. And, I have written about this, you know, very cold-blooded killer for a long time, and he does have this moral code, and he does sort of trend to do the right thing, and he doesn't kill, just for the sake of killing or for money or, out of evil. He feels like he has this skill set and he's trying to use it for good. And Whetstone, this character Campbell Coyle in the novel, is the villain, absolutely, and he's the antagonist up against Court. But I really wanted his, as I said before, his mindset to make sense to the reader. So he's a retired assassin, has no interest in picking up his guns and going back out and killing again. But something happens at the beginning of the book where not only does he feel like that's what he should do, and not only did hopefully the reader go, okay, that makes sense why he's doing it. There's even a scene in the book, I think, where the gray man is going like, well, I kind of get why he's doing it. It sort of makes sense. So even though he's a villain, so it's always in the eye of the beholder, and it's always as the writer, you control the point of view, and you control what the reader sees and what the reader knows. And that's why I tried to open this book where you almost see the gray man as the villain at the beginning of the book, because you see kind of the reference point of one of his victims, and it's somebody that really doesn't want to go up against the gray man on that particular day. He just finds himself in that situation, and of course the gray man is doing, he's on an objective, on a mission that makes sense to him too. So I think I just wanted to write almost about the insane futility of it all. And that kind of carries over into the real world some, and I think about things like that.
Well, you brought up the real world. Um, I've been wanting to ask you this question for a while because every once in a while I write down lines of a book that I just love. And in Commander in Chief, which you wrote over 10 years ago, Jack Ryan says, oh, I had to write it down. It's not possible to tell a lie well enough to make it true. I mean, we live in AI, and I know things have changed a lot in 10 years. So is Jack
Yeah.
Ryan's statement still true, or can lies become reality nowadays?
I mean, it's like we're in a post-truth world, as people say these days. And I think it's really sad and it's really scary. And I'd like to think, when you're writing fiction, you can be as idealistic as you want. But I mean, I'd like to think that a lie doesn't become true. And I'm fascinated by things that happened in the world. And I know, like, well, when they happen, I go, well, no one's going to believe that because that's so fake, or I can completely prove how that, what they're saying isn't true. I'll give you like a quick example. When Russia invaded Eastern Ukraine in 2014, they took over these oblasts. They immediately had these sham elections, and with their guys with guns standing there in the polling booths, and their candidates all won. And I remember just kind of laughing and scoffing and going like, the Russians are so gullible to think the West is going to believe that, because we have all the evidence, we have all the receipts that this whole thing is a sham and faked. And then a few years later, our leaders in America are going like, 96% of the people in Eastern Ukraine voted to be part of Russia, which is just asinine because that's not what happened at all. But it just showed my naivete, even somebody that's like studied political science since I was 12 years old. I've been interested in it. Still, I can be fooled and too naive. So maybe it was a naive thing for me to have written that, but it's also an idealistic thing. And, at least in fiction, let's hold on to our ideals a little bit.
It's true. I think sometimes I think fiction is truer than reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Men of principles. I that's the last. Oh, sorry. We have to talk about Bouchercon.
Hmm.
I have never been to one, and I know you've
Oh,
been to many of them. So I've been asking people, A, any good stories you have, or any good advice you can give me.
well, it depends on what your goal is. I looked before coming on here today. This will be my 13th Bouchercon, which is amazing. My first was in San Francisco in 2010. And the only time I've ever been to Canada in my entire life, I'm ashamed to say, was the Toronto Bouchercon, which was, I think, 2017 or 2018.
17, I think.
Yeah, it was a fantastic event. I love the city, and it was really well done. And I can't wait to go to Calgary. I'm very excited. I was telling my wife, I'm just like, I've never been to Canada, but I've been to Montana. That's the closest I've been to Calgary. So I'll get to go over the border. So we're both really excited to go. And I always have a great time. I like it because I'm a thriller writer and it's sort of a mystery, crime, and thriller convention. And I go to
Mm,
other thriller conferences and I have nothing bad to say about them, but it's kind of neat to see other writers that you wouldn't run into. It's kind of a wider pool of writers and readers. And I'm on panels with people that I wouldn't, I'm not normally on panels with when I go to
mm,
thriller based conventions. And it's cool to meet all those people. And story wise, um, let me just recommend that if you're interested in the books or the writers, just feel free to go up and talk to people. It's people are very, very approachable. I remember in my first few conferences previous to Bouchercon, I went to some other writer conferences before I was published, and I remember just being very sort of like nervous about approaching a writer and either asking for advice or just shaking their hand and say I enjoy their work. And now, as somebody that's been doing this for 15 or 16 years and standing with that group of writers, people come up and talk all the time, and we like it. And it's a great opportunity to stand there at the coffee shop or the bar or just walking through the hall or after someone's event or at a signing and just having a quick conversation with them. And I think that it's a very approachable conference. It's big. I like the fact that it's in a different city every year because it really does bring in different people who can't necessarily go to New York in July or whatever.
mhm.
So I think Bouchercon is just a wonderful place that's a very, very approachable people. And, I would just recommend people talk to other fans or talk to other people who are trying to be published if that's what their goal is. Or, as I said, talk to the writers themselves. And I think you'll be glad that you did.
That's great advice. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you don't mind a compliment, I read a lot of books, and your twists and turns still get me.
Oh, thank you so
I'm
much.
like, wow, that's clever. So
I
it's a
appreciate it.
pleasure to talk to you.
Trying to pull it off one more year. I'm working.
All right, thank you so much.
I appreciate it.